had been through these hard mile markers, and yet the day that I dreaded most was discharge, because I could not
Yeah.
fathom in my mind and in my heart how a mother could possibly walk out of a hospital and leave her baby behind.
Welcome to Fem MD, real talk for women who are balancing careers, ambition, and the chaos that comes with it all. Today's guest is Brooke Martin. She's an Emmy-winning news anchor, now turned author and mother. Her book, Controlled Burn, shares her journey of faith and resilience through a time of tragedy. And interestingly enough, we are related. How are you, Brooke? It's been so long since I've seen you.
I know. I'm doing well. I'm doing really it's a good season. How are you guys doing?
Oh, we're so good. I wanted to have you on the show today to talk about your book, Controlled Burn. Will you kind of open the door for us a little bit and talk about your inspiration behind the book?
Yeah, it's so fun to be on with you, Lauren, and I wish we lived closer, because it's one of those relationships we get to see each other maybe once a
No.
year and it's not enough. But yeah, so my inspiration for the book was just our story, our family's story. I was a news anchor for 15 years. And so, I had a platform locally here in Indianapolis, and was very accustomed to telling the community stories. And in 2018, we received a diagnosis for our second child in utero, of anencephaly. And so, what that is medically is, I mean, in very simplistic terms, it's that the baby's skull doesn't finish development. Everything
Mm.
else about the baby develops perfectly fine. But because the skull does not finish development, it is 0% chance of survival. And so we received that diagnosis at about 14 weeks, and decided to carry what we found out was a girl. And so it began a very surreal journey for us. In the public eye, I continued anchoring the news every night as I'm growing, and just having to navigate the most imaginable circumstance and tragedy, and knowing that, you're going to have to say hello and goodbye to your child. And so it just thrust me into a different kind of spotlight, because our story actually went global. A lot of news outlets picked it up. There was some confusion about why we would decide to carry. Um, and so anyway, that was the catalyst for this message of controlled burn. After Emma's birth and death, I got back to work for a couple years. I never thought I would stop doing news. I mean, it was my dream career, my dream job. And then about 2 years after her death is when I felt this stirring, and it was born from hearing from so many others who were walking through their own grief and suffering, and honestly lost and drowning, and could not get unstuck from the grief. And here we were on the other side of it, completely transformed. I mean, our marriage, our family, our individual faith, we were different people. And I thought, what is the difference here? Like, why are some people like unable to come out of hard things, and some people are changed? And so it really started almost probably this journalistic pursuit in my heart, right? Of what's going on here? And how do I help? I mean, that was my heart's cry. It was like, how do I help people who are hurting, find the hope that I have found in this? And so, sorry, I'm kind of taking this a long direction, but the true catalyst for this
Oh,
book
this is great.
was one afternoon, as I'm feeling this call to leave news, which was terrifying. I spent my whole adult life building this career. Um, it's giving up prestige, it's giving up influence, it's giving up identity, it's giving up clothing budget. And you're like, this feels kind of terrifying, that I feel like I'm supposed to maybe leave this job. And so I was driving down the highway, and I remember I just prayed and I said, God, if you're calling me out of news, will you tell me what you're calling me into? And first time in my life, Lauren, hasn't happened since. I see the clearest vision in my mind's eye of a burned out forest. It's just like blackened, like the trees, the spindles, the
Hmm.
ash, everything. And with it came the words controlled burn. And I was stunned because I knew I was hearing something and I had no idea what it meant. And I'm driving and I just get real quiet and I'm like, okay, God, explain. And piece by piece, he started showing me how life's fires, our pain and suffering can take one of two divergent paths. Like our pain can actually very easily grow out of control if not contained and turn into wildfires that can destroy for generations, right? Like we've seen this, the trauma that
Hmm.
turns into addiction, that
Yeah.
turns into loss, the betrayal that fractures families. Like these are the wildfires of life. I've experienced them myself. But he was saying there's another way, and it is controlled burns. And it's when our pain and our suffering is actually bordered by his promises and his provision and his power. Life suffering can actually burn away what is keeping us from his presence and in turn leave behind beautiful nutrient rich soil that can grow things inside of us that could have never grown without the pain and suffering. And so I just was like, whoa. I remember I came home and I said to Cole, I said, sit down. I said, I saw this vision, expecting him to like laugh me off. I saw this vision and I think I'm supposed to leave my job. I mean, this is over half of our family's salary at the time. And without skipping a beat, Lauren, he looked at me and he said, do it. And I was like,
Oh.
okay. And so, we were different people. We were people who could trust the leadings. We could trust that if God's calling us somewhere because we had just walked through um, the most profound loss of our lives and we saw his faithfulness in it. So it was like we knew we could say yes to what was next. And so that was where it started. I
Mhm.
didn't want to write a book. I just thought, let me just help people somehow get a curriculum out there. And long story short, but I ended up receiving a call from the number one literary agent in the country. And after talking, she was like, controlled burn needs to be told. I'm sending you a contract. And the rest is history, as they say.
And I remember when we were sitting at Grandma Shirley's kitchen table, you were telling me about the book writing process. First of all, I'm curious why you said you'd never write a book. And then secondly, talk about like the real struggle and challenge that writing a book is, because I had no idea what went into the process.
Yeah. So the real reason I didn't want to write a book is I had this false notion that there are enough books. Like everyone has a story. Ours, although compelling in different ways, it doesn't need its own book. And it was almost probably a little bit of like false humility, like if I'm really being honest, of like, who am I? Um, and and now that I'm on the other side of it, I have gained such an appreciation for the power of story, of our testimony. Like each of us carries story. And story is something that no one can argue against because it is your experience. It is um so personal to you. And so many people, although they were confused, like for example, they were confused by our decision to carry Emma. People often said, did you get any hate mail? Like, did you get any, or even just like kind of nasty stuff about like your decision? And I said, not one, like not one, because although like that topic is contentious, no one can argue against your personal story. And so that's why I encourage everyone now that I talk to, I'm like, your story is valuable. It does something. It can unlock something in people when you tell it. And so now I'm fully converted to the side of, tell your story. Because I've seen the effects of it now. But the writing process, to answer your question, was profoundly difficult, especially for me, because I had spent, with my career in news, I was trained to take the most complex of stories and situations and get it into 30 seconds,
Simplify.
like no details. Details are the enemy, like just nuts and bolts, nuts and bolts. And so the first day that I sat down at my computer after I signed this contract to write this book, and they're like, "Oh, you have 4 months to write it." And I'm like, "Oh, that must be normal." Like, I had no idea. I was just literally such a novice. And I sat down at my computer and I was absolutely paralyzed because I was like, "This is so many words." Like, this I am supposed to write so many words, and I am not used to writing so many words. And so it was such a process of almost like a partnership with God, where I was just like, "God, you have got to give me the inspiration," because I didn't even know, is this a memoir? Is this self-help? Like, what is this book? And, um, and what it turned out to be was something I never expected, and that is a very deep, like, biblically deep resource for anyone walking through pain and suffering to understand the hope of Jesus in it. And and our story is in it, along with many others that are kind of woven through the chapters, but the main purpose of the book is to take readers through their own fires, like starting in their personal forests, discovering what is inside of each of us, all the way through to the agony of the flames and the wasteland afterwards, to the beauty of the regrowth at the very end that leads readers on this journey of profound hope. And that's why I have such a heart for this book, because I really believe it's not my words. In fact, I had to record the audio book in Columbus, Ohio this past summer. And as I'm reading it, I'm going, I wrote that? Like, that's wow. Like, I needed that now. And I forgot I had even said that. And so it just it just solidified the fact, like, okay, this was propelled by something bigger than me. Because the truths in it are they sink deep.
Yeah. Um, so if you're okay with it, I want to walk back and are you okay with sharing some of the details of like how you guys first found out about Emma's diagnosis and kind of like how your medical team guided you through the process?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm an open book. So how we found out. I was, like I said, about 14, maybe 16 weeks pregnant, and I developed a bad cold. I had missed a couple days of work because it was in my lungs. And so I just went into my OB, since I was there all the time anyway. And nurse practitioner prescribed me a Z-Pack. And before I left, she said, "Hey, do you want to sneak in and see the baby?" So I was actually alone at the time of diagnosis. And I remember the ultrasound tech printing off pictures and leaving the room and coming back and mumbling something about the machine not working. Bless her heart. And I was oblivious, like, totally, until the nurse practitioner
Mm-hmm.
walked back in, and then she placed her hand on my arm and she said, "Your baby's skull isn't developing. I'm so sorry." And she left the room. And so I was alone on the ultrasound table, and tears just started flooding down my face. And I was just in this haze of confusion of like, what does that even mean?
What does that mean?
And
Yeah.
and then I heard this really loud whisper to my heart of Emmanuel, Emmanuel, and this like word over and over. And to be totally honest with you, I was confused by it. My background, I grew up Christian, so I knew that term meant God with us. But beyond that, honestly, I could only connect it with Christmas, and I was just like super confused. And then my doctor walked in, and he very tenderly said, "It is what we thought. It's anencephaly." And and then I had a time with the ultrasound tech after that where I'm just like, I cannot see through my tears to tie my laces. She's picking up a few of her things. I know I have to ask her one question, and I'm like, I can't even speak. I don't even know. And so I got out 3 words, and I just said, "Could you tell?" And she looked at me, and ugh, her look, I can still see it. It was so sad. And she said, "It's a girl." And And so it wasn't until so we were coal rushed in. We were sent to maternal fetal, and I remember my first question to the doctor was, "What happens next?" Because I assumed, like, we were given
Mhm.
very little information, so I assumed, um, our daughter would die in utero, and I would have to go through D&C, and I'd never been through, that process, and so I'm just thinking, like, what happens next as far as that goes? And she says, "Well, we don't do it here because we were at a Catholic hospital." She said, "We don't do it here, but you can go to Planned Parenthood." And so immediately, I was like, "Why would I have to go to Planned Parenthood for a D&C?" Like, you're just in this swirl of confusion, like, you can't make sense of
Yeah.
anything. And, and then actually my husband's voice, like, is what broke the silence, and he just said, "We're keeping the baby." And I looked at him, and I looked at her, and I was like, "Oh, like, this is the conversation we're having." And he says, Lauren, to this day, he's like, "I don't even remember saying that." Um, it was just such a surreal time, but it was almost like
Mhm.
it was just the decision was made, and then it wasn't until we got home and did our own research that we discovered, our daughter would likely survive full term, and that we might even have some time with her after her birth, maybe, maybe not.
Mhm.
But we were not told about the prospects of life, right? It was kind of like the assumption of death. And I get it. I think over 85% of anencephaly pregnancies are terminated, and I have the utmost compassion for parents who make either decision. Um, but I
Mhm.
feel like we were guided by grace to make ours. And what I see now looking back is a profound truth um, that God won't waste anything. He won't waste anything, whether, whichever, like, he it is life is so valuable. And so I feel like we were the recipients of incredible grace to make the decision that we made. And the reality is, and this is just real talk that I think needs to happen more. If we were at a different hospital where they did the procedure there, it's very likely
Mm.
we could have been offered to go up three stories and have it done. And I heard from many parents who made that decision. And the grief and sometimes regret, sometimes not. Sometimes it is like that is what we needed to do. But I just feel and believe that we need to make changes in our medical system to allow time for processing, because these are just like I said,
Yeah.
I had never experienced that level of emotional chaos, mental cloudiness. I mean,
Mhm.
whatever you wanna call it. And to make a decision of that magnitude at the time, it just feels a little, honestly, irresponsible to me. So that was the medical side of things. And then we were walked through the pregnancy with a beautiful team of doctors and surgeons and counselors. And, Emma was born via C-section, and she was born alive. And that's a whole other part of the story, if we want to get into. But the diagnosis part, I think a lot of people are so caught off guard because we don't talk about this part. It's kind of the
I
unspoken.
think it's so important to think about, yeah, like you said, the emotional chaos that you were put into, this like frantic moment where you feel like you have to make some life-changing decision. You're like, well, I need to sit down and like think about all this. I'd like more information. I mean, part of me wonders, did they ever offer, I mean, HIPAA probably precludes this, but for you to talk to a mother who had been through something like this, was there any opportunity for you to reach out to women who had gone through the same exact scenario?
No, no, we had kind of like a counselor isn't the right word, and I'm not remembering kind of the name, but somebody who kind of walked through us from the hospital, who is, trained in kind of walking with parents through difficult situations. But yeah, they can't really. give us any other names. And there were, like, some grief support groups that we didn't take part in, um, but nothing like you said, where yeah, connecting like, "Hey, been
Yeah.
there, done that. Let me take your hand." I mean, that would be so beautiful.
Yeah. And then as your pregnancy progresses, how did you deal with the societal and like work component? I mean,
Yeah.
did you tell people at work? You also had Max at the time, a son. Walk us through like how you and Cole decided to tell people and who you told and how that played out.
Yeah, so we had already made the announcement that I was pregnant, to all the viewers, and, like, local news is like a big family. Everyone gets excited for you, and it's just it's a really special thing, and so you're connected to the viewers in this kind of surreal way because they feel like they know you, um, and so everyone knew I was pregnant, so it was like we either had a choice of hiding this through, the remaining 6, 7 months and just pretending like everything is okay, which to me would have been torture, um, or we could be honest, and so that was another really kind of, cool, for a lack of a better term, thing that happened through this was I was going to write a blog and to tell about the diagnosis. I had a conversation with my news director. It was like, "What do we wanna do?" And I was like, "I'll just write something." And a photographer from the station was coming over to take pictures to go with the blog. And that morning that he was coming over, I awoke out of my sleep, like, already with a thought, like, going, I don't know if that's ever, like, happened to you, like, where I'm like, "Oh, was I dreaming about this or just thinking about this?" Either way, it was so clear, and it was that you write for a living, Brooke, and writing will allow you to craft the words in such a way to frame it
Hmm.
as maybe a little bit better or, you know, um, positive or, like it will give me the ability to do what I have done my whole career, which is to put on a facade. And so I texted the photog and I just said, "Hey, if you get this in time, will you bring a video camera instead?" And he did. And he got there and I said, "Just press record." And Cole and I sat on our couch without planning a word of what we were going to say. And we just shared the news, as ugly and hard and real as it was. And we sobbed through the whole thing.
Hmm.
And it was that video that actually made its way around the world, that captured people's hearts because it was like, this is real. And that set a tone for me for the rest of my pregnancy of, hey, you've been really used to looking put together and, um, putting a shiny face to everything. And this is a
Yeah.
time to be really authentic. And so there were many times, so, throughout the pregnancy that I would update viewers, via video or whatever. And there were many times that I would record something and then delete it because I'm like, nope. Like you just tried to be more positive than like you're really feeling right now. Like you tried to put a little spin on that, and that's not how your heart's actually feeling. And so
Hmm.
it was really, um, healing for me in a way of like, okay, this is the first part of allowing my suffering to strip me of something that I hadn't even realized had grown up over me. It was the first time my fire, right, like had started
Yeah.
to burn away something that like an invasive weed that I didn't even realize was growing in the forest of my soul. And it really was, like, freeing because I was like, "Oh, I don't have to be, like, put together. Like, I'm just gonna be honest," and I think it's what made so many people actually, like, lean really close, into our story because it was like, "Oh, this is, real." And
Yeah.
so they got to see the ugly and the beautiful, so,
Yeah. Pretending just never feels right. I mean,
yeah.
the ability to share the tragedy as you were going through it, as hard as it was, I feel like it was just such a unique situation where you had this giant community that you felt very intimate with, the dichotomy of like being pristine, perfect on news all the time, and then flipping that to be your sobbing, authentic self with your husband on a couch. I still remember the video.
Yeah.
Walk us through the birth of Emma and the time that you got to spend with her.
Yeah. Um, Man, I always try to allow myself to um go there emotionally because I've always said that if I ever get to a point where I don't feel it, I don't want to share it anymore because I don't want our story to be something that I ever use, right? Like I don't ever want it to be something that becomes calloused.
Yeah.
So sometimes I just like to take a minute and just remember. Um, March 15th was day of delivery, and so she will be 7 years old this March. Feels like yesterday. Um, Cole and I walked into the hospital, and we we were propelled by the prayers of so many, like so many. And that's another thing that parents of infant loss mostly do not experience. It's a lot of isolation. And I realized that we were the exception and not the rule. And so I just want to say that to people who have been through this and have felt very alone. Like that is the most normal situation. We had incredible support, and we walked into the surgery room and just felt like overwhelming peace. And Emma was born alive, and the nurse handed her to Cole first. And I remember his furrowed brow, like he was looking at her. And the anesthesiologist asked me a question, and when I answered him, Emma turned her head, like recognizing my voice. And so Cole handed her to me, and I got to tell her things I had waited a long time to tell her, um, that I was proud of her. I told her how many people loved her and that she could go. And I handed her back to Cole, and it was there in his arms 21 minutes later that she passed from, I say, from her daddy's arms to the arms of her heavenly father. And the hardest part though, Lauren, it was actually a few days later because Emma was beside us in the hospital room for a few days because she was in a device called a cuddle cot, which is like a bassinet, except it's a cooling device. And so it actually allows babies to be with their parents for bonding and closure. And so, we got to take pictures with her and our families got to hold her. So a beautiful, beautiful gift of time. But I had been through the diagnosis and the delivery and the pregnancy, delivery, the death. I had been through these hard mile markers, and yet the day that I dreaded most was discharge because I could not
Yeah.
fathom in my mind and in my heart how a mother could possibly walk out of a hospital and leave her baby behind. Like it didn't seem emotionally possible. Like I felt like this was gonna do me in. And so I woke up the morning of discharge and I remember crying out and I just said, I can't do this part. And I meant it with everything. I'd been through so much, but this felt like it was gonna bring me. And in that very instance, I experienced something that has changed me forever. And it was like this surge of strength that just took over my body. And I felt as if like a literal weight was dropped on top of me, but of peace. And it just like annihilated like any fear that I had. And I just realized the aid of heaven is actually like being poured out for me right now. Like I feel it and I know it. And um and anyway, we were able to rock Emma that morning and spend our last precious moments with her and hand her to the nurse when it was time. We walked out of the hospital and we got in the car, and I remember we buckled our seatbelts and we looked at each other and we smiled. And it wasn't because the grief was gone or anything. It was just like we just experienced what we grew up claiming to believe our whole lives, right? Like about Emmanuel, about God with us, all this stuff that kind of used to resonate as almost religion religiosity or folklore even. And it was like we just realized it's true. And there's no greater gift than to realize it's true. And so that's what began this transformative journey for both of us, but for me specifically, of this awakening to the reality of what is mine through Emmanuel, through the gift of Jesus. And it made me like insatiable for him. And so I just it just changed everything, and it stripped me of everything, and it left me on this side of things where I'm like, oh, if this is true, this belief system I've claimed to believe my whole life, if this is actually true, what does it look like to live like I believe it? And so that's where we are now. I've been out of news for 3 years. I write, I speak, I want people, I want everyone to know what is possible through pain and suffering, and the hope that is theirs through Jesus. It's just my heart's passion. I I just love him so much, and I just love talking about him. So and love talking about Emma too.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. It's such a powerful story, and hearing the the aspects that gave you strength, like your husband, your relationship with God. It's probably seems unimaginable to have gone through something this hard without either of those things.
Yeah, it does. And I see it. Like I see it from others. Um and and I think it's just why I'm like, it doesn't have to, like, I understand why like divorce rates are high after, children's deaths. Like, I get it. We grieve in different ways, we mourn in different ways. So much about pain and suffering is wants to end us. Like, pain and suffering is evil. It is not what God intended. And so it's determined to kill, steal, and destroy. And it will,
Mhm.
if we do not have the hope of Jesus. And so it's just, I think what I found is it's bigger, it's better, it's more freeing, it's than I could have ever thought or imagined. And I realized, I often say it like this. I was like, I was taking a penny of what was given to me, when the riches of heaven were at my disposal. And that's what I experienced in that hospital room. Like that, I was like, I got a taste of it, and I was like, oh, this is my reality. This is actually the realest thing about me. Like, that's how I can describe it. It felt like the realest reality of my life was that moment, even though it was so supernatural. And it
Mhm.
made me just like, I need to find out about this. I need to actually start living what I say I believe. And when I did, Lauren, it just changed everything. And like, doesn't mean life is perfect and great, it's still hard, but it's just peaceful. It's freedom. It's everything that I was trying to attain on my own, but
Yeah.
was falling short.
And then you had Marlo.
Yes. Yeah.
Were you were you and Cole planning another pregnancy? I mean, you had been through this horrific tragedy. Were you afraid to get pregnant again?
I wasn't afraid to get pregnant, but I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, I was always throughout, once I did get pregnant, I I had a really hard time thinking something bad wasn't about to happen. And so um I probably not probably I struggled to bond, I think, in pregnancy with her, like way more than I did with Max. Um and it took a little while, like even after she was born, of like forming this, like, because with Max, it's like, your first pregnancy, you're like, this is always going to be great, like you go into it
Yeah.
fearless. And so with Marlo, it was a different situation. It was almost as if I remember when we found out it was a girl, and it was almost as if like my mind had a hard time comprehending the goodness of God after that. Like, and I say this too, and I really I like to kind of I like to say that redemption, so many times we talk about redemption, and it's not replacing what was lost, because there's a lot of mothers who have walked through loss and have not gotten pregnant again, or, cannot. And so redemption is not about what's replacing what's being lost.
Mhm.
Redemption in my mind's eye, redemption through suffering is knowing him, knowing Jesus. And so we did have Marlo, and she is the greatest gift. And I remember feeling absolutely like in awe that we were given her. Um, but it's not, she is not our redemption. So
Yeah.
yeah, but she is 5 now, Max is 9. And yeah, we celebrate Emma's birthday every year. We talk about Emma. The kids know where she is. And it's really fascinating. Someone recently just asked me that. They said, "How do you talk to your kids about it?" And I said, It's just like the reality that it is. And what's remarkable about it is that they have this um, like an absence of the fear of death. Like they are
Yeah.
very well versed with the reality of death, with heaven. And it's beautiful. It's something I never had as a kid. And so I'm like, we can't shy away from this with our kids, because there's something in it for them too.
Yeah, almost something bringing something beautiful out of something tragic.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I keep seeing, like, over and over and over. I was speaking at a women's group this week, and a woman came up who has been drowning in the grief of an accident that her son had for years, and she hasn't been able to like get herself out. And she found freedom that day. And she was like, I think I'm ready to let this go. And I got home, I just started crying, because I was like, here's Emma's story continuing to bring hope and freedom and healing. Um, and I'm like, and that's what I say, going back full circle to like when I say God will not waste an ounce of your pain. He will not waste it. And I just see him continuing to show that. And every time I'm like undone by it, because I'm like, still, like, it's gonna be 7 years. You're still using her. And I'm just so grateful. So grateful.
Talk about you mentioned that you understand how the divorce rates can be so high in situations where people go through something horrific like this. Did you and Cole see a counselor at all together during this, or how did you approach that component of it?
No, we didn't. I saw a counselor by myself, but honestly, I didn't love it. So I only went a few times. But you know what's really interesting is he was feeling now, knowing now, right? I did not know at the time, but he was feeling so disconnected because I was developing this bond with Emma. I was the one kind of on the forefront telling the story, and here he was kind of in the background, not feeling the connection. He wasn't feeling this spiritual transformation. Um, he says he just felt like he was kind of riding my coattails. And years later, did I even realize like what he was doing and how he was growing very far apart from me at that time. I was kind of oblivious to it, but I just remember um, lashing out at him because I was like accusing him of not being sad enough.
Yeah.
And it's like we grieve differently. We process differently. And so honestly, I feel like again, this grace of like, man, our marriage did make it through, but I see so clearly how others, really struggle. Because it like I said, it wasn't until years later when he actually opened up about a couple things during that time that floored me. Like, I was like, "You what? Like, you were what? You were feeling what? You were doing what?" Um, and and so we're still walking through aspects of healing, even today. So it's not just kind of a once and done, did you make it? Good. It's a journey, but it's one that, I can clearly see how it could have went sideways. And so it's another passion of my heart. I would actually love for Cole to join me sometimes in talking about this. He has a couple times, but men need to hear from another man walking through situations like this, because we as women tend to be better at processing and being emotionally vulnerable. Um,
Hmm.
Men struggle sometimes with that. And so I really would love for him, although he hates the spotlight, I would love for him to kind of sometimes jump in the fold and tell his side, because it's just as powerful as mine.
I'm curious when you said he opened up years later and kind of told you some things about, how he was feeling at the time. What prompted that discussion years later?
His relationship with Jesus. He so so you know, as God was kind of doing this transforming work and Cole was like feeling totally disconnected, God eventually met him in his own way and grew his relationship with him. It took probably longer. It was slower. It was not as like, explosive or dynamic in the time,
Yeah.
but it was just as real. And even now, there are times where I'm like, he is outpacing me in like his pursuit. And so now, God is so patient with us. He's not like coming in like with a fire torch, like, it's just, when you're ready to remember certain things, when you're ready to deal with certain things that you've held on to. He's so gentle in bringing certain things to our remembrance and being like, hey, you probably need to talk to Brooke about this. You
Hmm.
probably have you ever admitted to this? Have you ever, because what happens is we let all this junk from the past, it becomes our master. It keeps us in bondage because we're too scared of what it will cost us if we admit to it. We're too scared. And so what happens is, um, when we tell the truth, it breaks off the power of whatever you want to call it, sin, of just kind of the icky nature of living in this world. There is something powerful that happens when we confess to it. And so, as he's been prompted by God, the thing, and this is what I say, it won't have redemptive effect. Confession will not have redemptive effect if your motivation is to get right with somebody else.
Yeah.
Confession will only have redemptive effect if your motivation is to be right with God. And in turn, what happens is those relationships prosper and they are healed through it. But really, that has to be your motivation. And so that's what prompted Cole to bring this stuff up from years ago, is like, um, just God revealing to him what he needed to deal with in his own heart. Because God's goal for us is freedom. Like, he his goal is freedom. And so often we look at religion and stuff and it's like rules and, confinement and all that kind of stuff. And it's like we have it so backwards. Jesus came to give life and life abundantly. And he will not let us continue on in ways that he can see are keeping us captive. So that was Cole's kind of, and I think that side of the story is, we're praying into it, but I think that part of the story about his confession is going to be really life-giving for a lot of people, and I'll let him tell that when he's ready.
Yeah.
But I think it's a message a lot of men need to hear.
Brooke, I want to just extend the biggest thank you for sharing your story, being so vulnerable. You're really an incredible woman, an inspiration to a lot of us out there who've been through hard things and, are looking for some guidance. Where can folks find more of you? And where can they buy your book, Controlled Burn?
You can buy my book anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, wherever. I don't know where you buy books now. But it's also, like I said, it's on Audible now, on audiobook as well, if you're more of a listener. And then I have a website, and it's funny you said more, because it is morewithbrookemartin.com. And I have some resources there as well. And so, yeah, please reach out. I'm a kind of sort of on social media. It's like, you're so good at it and I'm so terrible at it. But kind of sort of, but yeah, please reach out. Like if there's anything I can do to help you, I would love to.
Today's episode is brought to you by the Hippocratic Collective. Check out our shows and content at hippocratic-collective.com.